Hello again. We're continuing our conversation about finances. Last time we dove pretty deep into the topic, and today we want to talk more about taxes, this ancient system that actually began long before any kind of formal governing structures like the state. There are all sorts of conspiracy theories claiming that people shouldn't have to pay taxes at all. Why are we born already in debt to the world? What's your view on that? I mean, when a person is born, they enter a world where everything already exists, and somehow, right from birth, they already owe something to everyone.
For a while, they don't really owe much, but then to fit into the system, although I don't really like the word fit in.
Yeah, into the system isn't
but
great
the
either.
system already exists.
Yeah, it's all there.
The system is built on certain rules, on certain patterns, and the only real question is, are these rules made for the person or for the state? What we need to recognize today is that there's been a serious shift toward the state. The state has become more important than the individual, even though it was originally created to serve the individual. And once that shift happens toward the state, we start to realize that the state itself doesn't actually exist. What exists is a service staff in the form of officials and politicians who create the illusion of a state. And when they say they're working for the state, what they're really concerned with is their own electability or the positions they hope to hold. And that's where the biggest distortion in what we call governance comes from. That's why the laws they create aren't based on love, but on fear. If we take a look at the legal systems of almost any country, we'll see they're dominated by punishment, not encouragement. So that's the perspective we'll have to speak from today. Because if we just talk about taxes without touching on how people are brought up and the dependency of those who supposedly run the government, which is meant to serve people, then we won't be able to fully unpack the topic of taxes.
Of course. I think we'll get to that question in full as we go. But here's our first question. Which of the existing tax systems can actually lead a country or territory to prosperity? In other words, is there a country today that's already on the right track?
I don't think so. Maybe I don't know all the existing tax systems, but based on the worldview that's being instilled in children through schools and universities, there's no way we can have a taxation model that brings real prosperity to the world. Because there's that utopian idea of communism where it's from each according to their ability to each according to their need. But we already understand that's impossible. Because with the kind of upbringing and education people receive on Earth today, it's not going to lead anywhere. Because the foundation of all communication is the presence of love in every person. And that begins with the mother's love for her child. And then with the kind of caregivers and the states they're in when interacting with these children. That's what eventually creates the society that will later be taxed.
So we need to model the society first? And then the tax system will naturally emerge to fit that new society.
The real question
The most
is,
progressive version of society.
we have this concept of worldview. It's about how we think. And if we embed a new way of thinking, one based in love, then taxation will look completely different. Right now, we're shifting from a fight or flight model into one of negotiation. But that still won't lead us anywhere because the ones who negotiate better will always win. And those who don't will lose. And again, as long as officials and politicians are chosen through manipulation of public opinion, and as long as people aren't equipped to know who and how to choose, because they're not required to understand the psychology or the tools that media and marketing use to influence them, unfortunately, we won't reach the kind of taxation model that's truly needed. Because in my view, politicians in any country should be chosen based solely on how much love they embody. And we need a system that clearly identifies how much love a person carries. Same goes for officials. They shouldn't be selected based on their connections to politicians, but on how professionally they approach their responsibilities and on their well-rounded development in all the areas required for the role they're meant to fulfill.
That would be wonderful. Our second question actually lets us look into the future. Will humanity ever create a perfect formula for taxation, one that maximizes human fulfillment and supports the development of nations? As of today, what's the real potential of political system to reach that?
Zero.
Zero?
Zero. It's not possible right now. And only if we go through some kind of cataclysm, serious upheaval that forces humanity to reset and change the core values driving their actions. Because as long as we keep operating from the so-called values of democracy, we're not going to get anywhere. For people to make truly informed and wise choices, there first have to be conditions that allow them to understand things from a place of love. If their decisions are made from ignorance or with selfish motives, or through a distorted worldview, they'll never make the kinds of decisions that are truly needed.
So our job is to at least outline this, to name some first steps society could take in that direction, right? What could each of us do right now to spark the thought in someone, at least that maybe something does need to change?
We need to reflect on how the universe is structured, because the universe is built on the principle of evolution. And we at least need to begin shifting our thinking from spotting the bad, thinking in terms of negation, judgment, and emotional outbursts, to noticing the good, thinking constructively, and looking for ways to do that harmoniously and effectively for the whole system. Because sadly, we see the same strange patterns repeating again and again. If anyone has studied the history of car manufacturing, they might know that fuel in the beginning was, let's say, terribly inefficient. Engines kept breaking down and everyone blamed each other. At one point, they started adding lead to fuel and suddenly it became more efficient. But then it was discovered that the level of lead exposure was way above what's safe for human health. And both car and fuel manufacturers tried to claim it was normal, even when the lead levels in the environment were 50 times too high. It took tremendous effort from certain individuals to prove that it was lead, and eventually, after a huge fight, leaded fuel was banned. And I can tell you now, we're in exactly the same position again, but this time with electric cars, which are being labeled as eco-friendly. But in reality, it's a disaster. If we think electric cars are clean just because they don't emit CO2, then first of all, we've got massive numbers of batteries piling up, and no one has even begun thinking about how to properly dispose of them. No one wants to spend money on that. And second, electricity has always had a negative effect on human beings. If a person sits on top of a giant battery, no matter what, their system will start to malfunction. Our bodies run on electricity too. And if we take just these two factors alone, one, the batteries, which no one knows how to dispose of and no one wants to deal with, and two, the number of people who will get sick over time due to long-term exposure to electrical currents, then we're facing serious disruption. And I can tell you, the same logic applies to politics, to business, and to taxation.
In the context of the example you gave, would a taxation system be effective if it, say, imposed progressive taxes on harmful industries, meaning calculating exactly what's harmful to the environment, to people, to institutions like healthcare, and taxing those heavily while giving eco-friendly industries the advantage of low taxes?
I think we need to take a broader view. If we're talking about hundreds of years of forward progress, then ultimately all harmful industries need to be eliminated.
But could a taxation system help move things in that direction?
Look, here's the thing.
You can't just make that happen with the snap of a finger.
The issue is adopting and implementing technologies that are more ecological. But ecological has to be considered from all sides, not just from the angle of, say, greenhouse gases and the accumulation effect. And the fact that electricity affects us negatively plus the fact that no one has figured out how to recycle batteries or even wants to spend money on it, that will have consequences for the environment thousands of times more serious than oil or even plastic, which we already have far too much of. So taxation most likely won't be structured around harmful versus beneficial production, but around people's willingness to pay. Strange as it may sound, taxes should be something people pay with joy, with interest, and with willingness. And once that happens, and it can be achieved step by step, we'll experience a completely different perception of the world than we do today. Because most people subconsciously understand that the majority of taxes are misused, and that's why, on the level of feeling,
the desire disappears.
There's resistance to paying taxes because people feel they're being used inefficiently. It's like when business partners divide profits by percentage, and one who holds a bigger share but puts in less energy automatically takes money that was earned by another partner's effort. That instantly creates tension. It's the same situation with the state. When it takes a certain amount of money from a person in taxes, that person can feel, because every one of us has empathy, where that money is going. The more it's misused and the more empathetic the person is, the stronger their inner resistance becomes. And with that comes the urge to seek out free economic zones or low tax regions and to move there.
Our next question is about tax-free zones. Is creating them actually beneficial? Which places on the planet are best suited for new tax-free areas? And also, why is it that some developed countries have very high progressive taxes, while others have tax-free zones where entrepreneurs essentially seek refuge?
We have to look at this from an economic perspective. If we take Dubai right now, for example, there are specific conditions that encourage business people to set up residency, establish companies, and keep their money there. And that's the key, keeping their money there. First, the state there is largely supported by oil money, which gives them a certain stability. On top of that, they attract investments they can use directly. They don't need to take funds away from their own citizens, and they don't need to go begging to the IMF for loans to finance projects or sustain the economy. In other words, they have strong economic backing. If we look at European countries, what we see there is populism. Politicians keep saying they need to make ends meet. That there are more retirees than working citizens. But if you break it down step by step, you'll find that their books simply don't balance. Their debits and credits don't add up. And this is mostly because they pander to voters making promises that don't work in practice. Then they go on to create conditions so ineffective that people lose any desire to pay taxes at all. That creates conflict. Because, as I said before, if someone sells a car for less than they wanted and then regrets it, that car won't serve its new owner well. Even if he got it cheap, the seller's regret taints the whole exchange. It's the same with houses, the same with services. Both sides, buyer and seller, need to feel good about the exchange. Only then will the money and the service truly serve a higher purpose. But here's the situation. When we pay taxes without joy, that money can't flow toward joy or toward anything harmonious. Instead, it either gets handed out to refugees, poured into inefficient projects, or simply pocketed by corrupt officials.